And what's going on, Trojan family? The Madman here on the one and only USC LAFB channel. Wanted to get on to talk a little bit of the recap of the Notre Dame game. Tim, Ryan, myself, we couldn't quite do a Sunday morning recap with travel schedules and whatnot. And Tim and Ryan are going to be on tonight for our Monday night call-in show. I'll be joining again on Wednesday night. But just given schedules this week, wanted to kind of get on and sort of share my thoughts about this game prior to Wednesday, because that just felt way too long, and wanted to get a couple of things off my chest and share some thoughts with all of you. So obviously, the big news over the last 2 days here, Notre Dame beats USC 34-24. A lot of conversation over the last 36 to 48 hours, of course, on where this game was, where it was lost, what are the larger implications and whatnot. I wanted to sort of offer my thoughts around kind of 2 points. The first, of course, needless to say, was the rushing yards discrepancy. USC's inability to stop the run and its inability to run itself ultimately was the difference in this game, right? Notre Dame, 306 rushing yards on 7 yards a carry, so 44 carries for 306 yards rushing. USC on the flip side, a meager 68 yards rushing on 23 carries, which is 2.3 yards per carry. So it's the age-old saying in football, if you can't run the ball and you can't stop the run, no matter how modern the game has gotten, no matter how analytic-driven the game has gotten, no matter how gadgety perhaps the college game has gotten, that is or will always stand the test of time, that you have to be able to run the ball and you have to be able to stop the run. And I think what was disheartening in this game felt very much like the Illinois game in terms of this defensive line just getting moved back and dominated at the line of scrimmage, and also felt truthfully like defensive lines of years past in 2024 and 2023. And so obviously there's some cause for concern here moving forward about just the physicality of this front and its ability to play offenses that are run first, want to be physical, but also have quarterbacks that are very credible game managers that know how to get the ball out quickly, and wide receivers on the outside that are serviceable from a possession perspective. And I think that's really the matchup right now that USC has struggled with this year. Because if you look at Illinois and you look at Notre Dame, similar construction of team. Both teams want to be physical at the point of attack, want to be run first, but they both got quarterbacks that are very credible game managers. Altmaier is a much better quarterback at this stage in his career than CJ Carr is, who looked very nervous as a first-year starter, as a redshirt freshman, particularly in that first half. But the difference between Illinois and Notre Dame is they had the ability to throw when they needed to. And it didn't need to be very exotic. It didn't need to be very dynamic. It didn't need to be game-changing, but just simple throws from an intermediate perspective. Those inside slants, those wide receiver curls were there, and the play selection was strong enough that it kept USC's linebackers in particular at bay. And so that's now the recipe. This is going to be the blueprint moving forward for teams, is to be run first, but to be able to throw the ball enough to keep those linebackers honest in a way that, as impressive as the Michigan win was, and I don't want to take anything away from that performance because it was really a call to arms in that particular game, Michigan's passing attack simply does not have the sophistication right now that either Illinois or Notre Dame does. You've got a true freshman quarterback in Bryce Underwood, and they really he's still struggling to find himself in terms of being able to read defenses. In that game, as great as Devin Tompkins was, as great as Crawford was in that Michigan game, and as much as the defensive linemen won their one-on-one matchups more often than not, it was also a linebacker game. You played 3 linebackers in the box. 3 of the top 4 leading tacklers in that game were linebackers. The linebackers' ability to shoot the gaps kind of empowered the defensive linemen to know that they had reinforcements and artillery behind them, that they could get sort of more aggressive with certain moves, and know that even if they missed on one particular play, that the linebackers were there to bottle up that Michigan run game in a way that you didn't have here against Notre Dame, because you had to sort of honor that intermediate pass game. And so now this becomes the blueprint moving forward for teams to play USC. And so can they continue now to sort of get more physical and be able to stop the run against these physical teams and these physical defenses? That's going to be the big question moving forward. And can they stay committed to the run game? So that's point number one. Point number two is, for all the challenges that USC had in this particular game, from both a run game perspective as well as giving up the run game perspective, this was still a very winnable game. And the fact of the matter is, even after Jadarian Price had that incredible electric kickoff return for a touchdown, you're still talking about a 27-24 ball game with 4.5 minutes to go in the third quarter, and an offense that was moving the ball fairly well from a pass game perspective. And, let's not forget, there was a moment there early in the second quarter of this game where it felt like it was going to get away. It was 14-10 Notre Dame. Notre Dame was driving first and goal at the USC 2-yard line. And it looked like, oh boy, if Notre Dame punches this in to go up 21-10, this is going to be some real tough sledding. And credit that USC defense. I think that first and goal play, CJ Carr, that was a misread. Both ends dove to the running back. If he just sort of kept it and went around, he would have walked into the end zone. He misread it. That got stuffed. Second down play got stuffed. And then Carr made an absolute mess of that third and goal situation, took the field goal even off the board. Shelby did a great job on that interception. But then on that ensuing possession for USC, Jacoby Lane dropping that third and goal touchdown, SC has to settle for 3. So you go into halftime saying, look, both teams kind of had an opportunity with more points on the board. It's probably even, Steven. You're going into the half 14-13. And I think you felt similarly again, even after that big Jacoby Lane touchdown catch that made it 24-21, the fact that Notre Dame returned it for a kick to make it 27-24, you still felt like this was a toss-up game. And then that final 20 minutes is really where the game was lost, because those final 4 USC possessions went interception, fumble, turnover on downs, interception. And now that last interception, you can argue, was, Maiava just trying to make something out of nothing there with less than 2 minutes to go, and the game was decided. But ultimately, this sort of comes down to those first 3 possessions in that 20-minute span. Maiava, a bad interception on that inside slant. But like we talked about on the pregame show, those are the balls where in tough weather conditions, when it's rainy, when it's windy, you don't quite have that seam in the same way. Tim and I kind of talked about that pregame, and it sort of came to light. Maiava just didn't have the feel on that throw. One throw, though, SC lucky that Notre Dame didn't capitalize on that particular possession. They were in deep again. Faison drops, sort of a point blank third down. That would have been a first and goal at the 7. And then Notre Dame misses the field goal outright. So SC gets that ball back. You feel like you got second life here. And then, disaster strikes with, after a huge play to Lemon, 37-yard play. You feel like you got great momentum there. This sort of inexplicable, reverse flea flicker situation where Lemon has the ball trying to throw it, ultimately fumbles, and Notre Dame wasn't going to screw up a second time, punch it in. And then that's, you're sort of in a 10-point hole. And then obviously everyone's talking about that 4th and inches that ended up being a rollout incomplete pass. And that was effectively your ball game. And I thought that sort of leads us to sort of the second point, where as much as we have given Lincoln Riley a lot of credit, and rightfully so, of sort of the maturity that he's shown in the 2025 season, he sort of reverted back to the 23 and 24 version of Lincoln Riley, the guy that gets spooked in big moments. And we've talked about it so much on this network over the last couple of years, where if a particular run play or 2 run plays get stuffed, Lincoln, used to get spooked, and then it would be throw. Or if he felt like, he was in a difficult position where he wasn't quite in his bag from a traditional play calling perspective, he'd sort of always throw in a kind of a panicked, trick play. And that's kind of what we saw over the course of this game on those back-to-back possessions there. That was very difficult to see. And so, Lincoln has to be able to kind of stay within himself and understand that, look, you didn't need a trick play over there. You can win straight up. It's those teams that have to resort to the trick plays are the ones that are acknowledging that they can't win straight up. And the fact that you didn't feel like you could get, 6 inches with a 6'4" quarterback on a QB sneak, and the fact that you had to roll out it just speaks more, I think, about the psychology of where Lincoln truly believes in this team a little bit, where, you can talk about being super physical as a team. And he was so proud of that, and rightfully so after the Michigan game. But to go back now on the road and not back it up, because physical teams don't need to run trick plays, in that point in the game. And physical teams certainly don't need to sort of bootleg and roll out on 4th and inches. And so this is going to be sort of a soul-searching moment for Lincoln Riley here. Is, can he kind of get over the hump and not revert back to 2023 and 2024 tendencies? So that's going to be the fascinating evolution here with this team moving forward. Is the sky falling? No. Were things as good with this team as after the Michigan win? Probably not. And are things as bad as it seems to be after this Notre Dame loss? Probably not. And I think there's sort of an element here of needing to be more even-keeled. I projected this team to be a 9-3 team. You can sort of go back and look at it from the last few months. I had this team going 9-3, 7-2 in the Big Ten, and either just in or just out of the college football playoff. And I had the 3 losses being at Illinois, at Notre Dame, at Oregon. And so now moving forward, you have an opportunity here. It's a tough opportunity, but it's still there. But given the way the resume has sort of laid out, I think USC now has to win in Eugene to have a credible opportunity to make the college football playoff. Going to be a very tall order, and certainly going to need to elevate their game from where they were Saturday night in South Bend, Indiana. But the nice thing is the schedule sort of breaks in their favor. Now, another bye week, 2 weeks to prepare at Nebraska. Now, Lincoln is a very difficult place to play, but I have to be honest. Nebraska may be one of the most overrated teams in the Big Ten. They got absolutely boat raced last weekend against Minnesota. They did not look good in their loss to Michigan, and even their 2 conference victories to the likes of Michigan State and Maryland. Those were choppy games where there were a lot of ebbs and flows to those games. It was very ugly. That Michigan State win, Michigan State's 0-4 in the Big Ten right now. Aiden Childs was 9 for 23 for 85 yards and 2 interceptions. And the win against Maryland, Dylan Raiola had 3 interceptions himself. So Michigan to me, Nebraska to me is not really in that top 5, top 6 of the Big Ten. This is a very winnable game for USC, especially with 2 weeks to prepare. And then you come back home and you go back-to-back home for Northwestern. Even though they're a great story, that's a very winnable game, and home for Iowa, which is more of an effort game. Iowa kind of plays the right way, does all the right things, but there's a significant talent discrepancy there. So SC is going to have an opportunity here with 3 straight games that are extremely winnable to get right and figure out how they can be a more physical brand of football, particularly going on the road. And then you got that ultimate test in Eugene. So it's going to be a really fun, interesting storyline to see where this goes. And I think now it's a new journey. It's a journey of 3 games to sort of have that preparation to go at Oregon and see if you can make a statement game. Because let's not forget, I think if this team walks away 9-3, there's a lot more work to be done, but you feel like there's some improvement from the last 2 years. You feel like there's kind of a building block, especially with a Michigan win in the manner that it was accomplished. You can hang your hat on that and say, okay, we've gone from 5-6 losses to a 9-3 season. Probably not going to be good enough for a college football playoff given the rest of that resume, but it's a building block now going into 2026. Lincoln Riley kind of turning the corner a little bit with his play calling, with his mentality. You have a number 1 recruiting class coming in. There's a really good feeling, I think, going into the 2026 offseason. You're not ecstatic, but the sky isn't falling either. I think that changes if you go 8-4, because I think if you look at this schedule, the floor is 7-5 with this schedule. When you look at Georgia Southern, Missouri State at home, Michigan State at home, at Purdue, home for Northwestern, home for Iowa, home for UCLA. I mean, when you look at that schedule, the floor is 7-5. I think there's 100 coaches in the country that could get this roster with this schedule to 7-5. It's really those 5 other games is what defines the season. At Illinois, at Notre Dame, at Oregon, home for Michigan, and then at Nebraska. So if you can get to 9-3, you feel like, look, with the floor being 7-5, you've made some improvements. But if you slip up and say you lose another game besides Oregon, I think 8-4 feels completely different given this schedule than 9-3 does. So lots more to unpack. I'll be back on Wednesday with the great Timbo Slice, and we'll chop it up with all of you fans. But I just wanted to hop on just for a few minutes to give some initial impressions. And keep your heads up, Trojan fam. Long season to go. Work to be done, but the sky is certainly not falling. As always, I'm the Madman. Got your back on the USC LAFB show. And as always, fight on.